Hi, it's Helen Tarrant. Welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. You're here with Helen Tarrant. So you've bought your first commercial property, but what now? What happens now? It's the takeover stage. You're a settlement. What happens the next step? You're kind of left with most of the buyers for the first time in commercial property. They've gone through the process of buying the first commercial property, going through understanding the property, understanding the tenant, and now they've got to the settlement stage. They don't know what happens after the purchase. So this is what this video is about. It's about the takeover process. How do you effectively manage that process so that nothing falls into the hole or the black hole, and then you've got tenants complaining, you've got things that you were meant to do but haven't done. So firstly, remember how during due diligence you made a checklist. So normally during due diligence, what we've done is we make a checklist of all of the tenants. So if you only have one tenant, we're going to check on the tenant history, the tenant's done the fit out, whether the air conditioning has been serviced, whether they're paying their rent on time, where the outgoings is up to, and anything that's outstanding on the building. So let's say for that one tenant, you found out that the air conditioning hasn't been serviced for 3 years. So you can't go and pay for something to be serviced or get your tenant to service that until they become your tenant. So that goes on the checklist to be done as soon as you take over. Let's say that there was a few things to follow up with the body corporate. So you were buying a strata property and you realized that the body corporate had some outstanding, they were doing some capital costs on the property, so capital expenditure. So they were going to fix say a roof, or they were going to do a new retaining wall, or they were going to get, let's say, a new landscaping done. Well, that can't be done. You can't follow up to see where that is up to until you own the property. So that goes on your checklist to follow up once you take over. But what happens if you're buying a multi-tenanted property? So you have 5 tenants. So let's say you have 5 tenants and each of them have their individual needs. Well, during due diligence, you would have made a list. You should be spreadsheeted. You should have spreadsheeted your lease to see where they expire, and to see whether the tenant's been paid on time, where the bond is, and everything else. So what happens is at settlement, you've got to check the settlement statement. So this is regardless of whether you have 1 tenant or 5 tenants or 10 tenants, however, you've got to check the settlement statement to make sure that the bond has been adjusted in your favor, or the bond's been transferred to you, or maybe the previous agent is holding the bond, or the previous vendor or a solicitor is holding the bond. You need to get it transferred to you. So make sure you get the bond. Make sure that any of the rent or outgoings has been adjusted. If it hasn't been adjusted, you need to make sure that it has or will be in the week that follows. Make sure that the tenant has paid rent. So let's say that you're settling on the 15th of the month and all the tenants paid their rent on the 1st of the month. Well, in that case, what happens is you're going to make sure you're getting paid for 15 days of the month that's left in advance, or been adjusted for that period. Now, once you get the property, and even though you've only got 15 days left and the tenant's paid up to date, you still have to make sure you invoice the tenant, make sure you check for that, and make sure you invoice the tenant so that they know that they're actually paying you rent at the next cycle. So the most important thing is, once you have the takeover, is to make sure that the tenant, you get in touch with the tenant. Because if you don't get in touch with the tenant don't know who you are. They don't know if they've got a new landlord. They don't know who to contact. They don't know if there have been any issues, who they're going to contact. Remember, when you did the due diligence, that might have been, let's say, 3 months ago. And you did the due diligence for a month, you got in contact with a tenant, and then it would have taken you 4 or 6 weeks to settle the property. So sort out the valuation, sort out the finance, sort out all the documents, and then settle. Well, that's 4 or 6 weeks that something could have happened to that property. 4 to 6 weeks, the tenant hasn't heard from you. So they don't know whether you've actually bought the property or not. So this is a really good time for you to actually get in touch with them, regardless of whether an agent is getting in touch with them or not. But you should get in touch with them and say, hi, remember me? I saw you during due diligence. I came and visited you. I'm now, I'm the landlord. I'm going to help you with these things, or, just wanted to check in with you to let you know. So it's really, really important to actually have that in process. So make sure you make a checklist during due diligence. Once you take over, the steps are to contact your tenant, Check that you've been adjusted for the bond and the rent and outgoings. Thirdly, to make sure that you contact the right agencies to make sure all of those outgoings are transferred to you. So make sure you contact the council to make sure they've got the most updated address for you. Make sure that you contact the strata, that they've got the most updated address if you're buying a strata property. Make sure that any water, electricity meters that needs to be transferred to you, or if it needs to be you're buying a vacant property, needs to be transferred to an upcoming tenant or incoming tenant, that you have the meter that you can pass on to them and that you having electricity in the meantime. So make sure you've got that. And anything else in terms of insurance, that you've got the certificate of currency that is up to date in your own name. And if you are engaging with an agent, make sure you've signed all the forms for that agent to take over. So Form 6 if you're in Queensland, other different forms in the other parts of Australia. So really make sure you've got that ready to go, because you're going to make sure that they've got the authority to act on your behalf. Also, you're going to need what we call a letter of atonement from the vendor solicitor, and that usually will be given to you by the vendor solicitor to say, yes, there's been a change in the ownership and now the tenant needs to pay you rent. So you might get that, or that might go to your property manager. So either way, make sure you have that or a copy of that letter. So make sure you have all of those things, and that's what makes you ready to then take on the property after settlement. From settlement, there's usually a busy period about 4 to 6 weeks where you're getting the property ready. That's making sure you contact all the tenants, make sure you talk to the tenant, make sure you action on all the things you promised to do for the tenant. So if that's servicing air conditioning, replacing air conditioning, getting the roof checked, or things like landscaping, cleaning, any of the things you promised to do for the tenant, make sure you get that action in the first 4 to 6 weeks, because you want the tenant to have faith in you as a new landlord. You want the tenant to feel that you are working to help them increase their business so they can be a longevity tenant. You want to show them in good faith you are starting out on a brand new foot. So don't relax during that period. Really get into it. Be proactive, talk to your tenants, work with them, or work with a managing agent to make sure all of those things are done. And then it's worthwhile to get updated photos, any amendments you want to done on the lease. So let's say that you take over and a lease is finishing up. You want to make sure that that's on your checklist too, that any amendments on the lease or any extensions on the lease, you start the negotiation as soon as you take over. So that's not fallen by the wayside, so that there's all the options are exercised. Any rent reviews that needs to be done, the agents has done them, and any negotiations, you start on the process so that you're not sitting there waiting for the agent to come to you, waiting for the tenant to come to you. You are taking a proactive approach. So in taking over, making sure these are the steps you need to follow. And this is a recap. So number 1, make sure you did a checklist and an action list while you did your due diligence. If you haven't, go back and review your notes, make that action list. Number 2, follow through on the action list. So do any of the maintenance on the property you need to do in the first 4 to 6 weeks to show your tenants good faith and to show the tenants you are different to the previous owner and that you're willing to work with them to help them increase the business. Make sure number 3, you contact the tenant, tell them that you are now taken over, you are the new landlord. Let them know if someone's going to be property managing or whether you're going to do it yourself. Number 4, make sure any of the leases that need to be negotiated, rent reviews, or extensions or options taken, make sure you start that process in the first month of taking over so that you start the process, because this process could take 2 or 3 months for it to happen. So any of the leases that's coming up in the next 3 to 6 months, make sure you start engaging the tenant in that process. And finally, number 5, make sure that you check your settlement statement to make sure that rent, outgoings, bond, anything else that needs to be transferred to you has been transferred on that statement. If it's not, you need to chase that up. And during the process of chasing that up, make sure that any of the outgoings are transferred into your name or your entity or company name that you bought the property in, because that's the way to ensure that you don't have any late fines or late notices and that your tenants have a smooth transition from the previous landlord to you and they have a good experience. The most important thing is they have a good experience, you have a good experience, and that moving forward, you can really build a successful commercial property portfolio in conjunction with working with your tenant. But if you need help and guidance and mentoring on particular issues when you first take over, because I know it's daunting, reach out to me at helentarrant.com or email me at helen@commercialpropertycashflow.com.au, and we'll set up a strategy call and I can show you how to buy commercial property the right way. Until then, and next episode, don't forget, hit the bell, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.